guys, welcome to my June wrap-up. I feel so good about this month. Like, I did not think I was gonna read as much as I did. I started off the month recovering from COVID, so I was like, oh, this is gonna be a really weird reading month, but I did all right. I also read 4 arcs, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, so also really proud of myself for that. I read some, like, new favorites. I read a little bit of manga. I read a couple library books. I read some new releases. I read some oldies but goodies. I read my first Brandon Sanderson book. Like, it was a successful reading month. So starting right off with a couple arcs, I read This Vicious Grace by Emily Theed. I absolutely loved this book. I gave it 4 stars. I had very low expectations going into this. The premise sounded a little typical YA fantasy chosen one, but it really transcended my expectations, and it's also going to be I think it's the June YA Fairy Loot pick. I haven't gotten it yet in the mail, but I've seen pictures of it, and I'm absolutely in love with it and eagerly awaiting my finished copy because this book was amazing. So this story follows Alessa, and she is known as the Fenestra of her island of Severio. And as Fenestra, she has the power to amplify a partner's magic. And the people with magical abilities on this island are known as Fontes, and they each have different, like, elemental powers, and she must choose a Fonte to help defend themselves, like their island, against this doomsday event known as Divorando. Unfortunately, every person she has chosen so far as her Fonte has died. Her power kind of sucks the life out of them rather than amplifying their abilities, and she just killed her 3rd Fonte on accident. So she's feeling the pressure as a chosen one. She doesn't understand why her abilities aren't working like previous Fenestra's abilities have. Again, it's a lot of pressure that she's feeling, you know. She's destined to save this island, but if she can't get her abilities under control in time, it's not gonna work. So while she's trying to figure out her powers a little bit better, she ends up hiring this bodyguard named Dante, who is kind of like roughing it on the streets. He fights for a living, and she's come to not be able to trust her own guard, so she hires this outsider, and he's really the only person that she can trust. Yeah, it's great. If you like the bodyguard trope, it's even better. There's delightful banter. I really liked Alessa as the main character. I actually listened to this on audiobook, and the narrator was amazing. There's a lot of Italian influence, both in the culture of the city as well as the language, and the Italian that she was able, like, that she read, like the pronunciation, it was beautiful. So I really enjoyed the audiobook experience for this. If you're curious about that, 10 out of 10 audiobook. It was such a fun read. I really liked the dynamic between Alessa and Dante. I thought that was really fun. The sort of climax was amazing. And yeah, it was a really fun YA debut, and I cannot wait for the rest of this series. Next up, I read the arc for the Throne by Hannah Witten. I actually have a finished copy right here from Barnes & Noble that I pre-ordered. It has exclusive end papers with these beautiful illustrations of the love interests. Like that, yeah. And some exclusive content, I believe an interview with the author at the end. So this is the follow-up and final book in the For the Wolf duology. Actually, it's called the Wilderwood duology, but the first book was For the Wolf, came out, I believe, last year, was really popular. I really loved For the Wolf. I loved their main character, Rhaedaris. She is the second-born daughter of this kingdom where second daughters are sent to the Wilderwood to be sacrificed. She has to kind of figure out the mystery of this tradition and why none of the second daughters have survived or at least succeeded in their mission. This book more closely follows her sister, Nevera, and I couldn't remember her name, sorry. Nevera was destined for the throne, but her deep connection to her sister Rhaedaris kind of changed her path, and we follow that journey in this second book more closely. And I can't really talk too much about this without spoiling the first one, especially where this is the end of the duology. I did really like Nevera as the main character, like more than I expected, especially with how much I liked Rhaedaris in the first book. I didn't love the romance quite as much in this book, but it was intriguing. I just have really complicated feelings about this. I love the story overall, but it did feel kind of drawn out, and we kept flipping back and forth between Nevra and Rhaedaris, and Rhaedaris' point of view just felt kind of unnecessary in this book. I was much more intrigued by Neve's point of view and her journey, and like Red was basically just like twiddling her thumbs the whole book, because like there wasn't really anything for her to do. So I was kind of frustrated by that. I did think the writing was beautiful. I thought the third act was kind of drawn out. There's this whole back and forth between Neve and the love interest about like what they're gonna do about this situation, and that just kind of exhausted itself pretty fast for me. So I didn't love the last act of this very much. I have a spoiler review on my Goodreads if you're interested in reading more about my thoughts there, because I don't want to really say anything too spoilery here, but I did end up giving this a 3 out of 5 stars just because like it didn't quite live up to the first book for me, and while I can see myself going back to reread the first book in the future, I don't know if I'd necessarily continue the reread. But I did really like Hannah Witton's writing, and she's coming out with a new book next year that I'm actually really excited about, so this didn't like kill my love for the author. It was just kind of a lackluster wrap up to a duology in my opinion. Then I picked up Tessa Bailey's new release, My Killer Vacation. This follows a, I think, 2nd grade teacher named Taylor who's on vacation in Cape Cod with her brother. They get to their like Airbnb house. She's really excited about it. It's super close to the beach. And almost immediately they find the dead body of the host, the owner of the property. So this bounty hunter guy named Miles gets hired by the murder victim's sister to kind of figure out what the heck happened, because the police aren't really investigating very deeply. They have like one guy in mind, and nobody, like the sister doesn't think that's who the murderer was, and nobody's sort of surrounding it other than the police think that that's what happened. So she hires this guy Miles, and he's on the case. He acts more of like a PI in this book than a bounty hunter, but he was previously a detective, but then he got too close to the investigation and things went wrong. So he's been living sort of a lone wolf bounty hunter lifestyle ever since. Him and Taylor cross paths because Taylor's really like into trying to figure out what the heck happened. And they are immediately obsessed with each other. Very like love at first sight. He feels very inclined to protect her because she's this sweet little 2nd grade wife material type of lady. And it was fun. It's not my, I don't know if I want to say it's not my favorite Tessa Bailey. I had fun reading this. I liked the murder mystery element that was at the center of this alongside the romance. And I feel like the way Tessa Bailey writes her men specifically, like her hero characters, and then like the way they are in bed, like this fit this guy the most out of any of her other heroes that I've read about. Like It Happened One Summer was fun, but I didn't think the way that Brendan acted like with Piper necessarily fit the character, and like that really threw me off and really impacted my enjoyment of the more intimate scenes. The dynamic like sexually between these two characters feels like it actually fit the characters the best. So that was fun. If you don't like the love at first sight sort of thing, I don't necessarily think you'll like this, but it was a fun time. I don't know if it's going to be a series. It kind of seems open-ended with Taylor's brother perhaps, but we'll see. But yeah, I think I ended up giving this like a 4 out of 5 stars. That's probably closer to a 3.5, but I was pleasantly surprised. Usually like I have fun with Tessa Bailey books, but I usually have more issues than I feel like I did with this one. So it was a fun time. Up next, I read another arc, I Know Who Am I, for The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by Megan Bannon. I think in the last video I talked about this, I kept saying Megan Brannon. I'm so sorry, Megan Bannon, if you ever see this, which probably not, but like, I'm so sorry. This is a delightfully quirky little fantasy romance that's a standalone, and it follows 2 characters named Heart and Mercy. Mercy is an undertaker, and she works at the edge of this small town. It's kind of got like Western, like steampunk vibes almost. This town borders a region called Tanria, and that region used to imprison gods, but they're no longer there anymore. But this region is very unique and has a lot of really strange resources that are like unique to this area. So some companies go in and like mine those resources and stuff. And then there's also this group of people named the Tanrian Marshals who go in and take care of Tanria's zombie problem. That's right, zombies. This is a very cute book that has zombies in it, and that's not normally my jam, but it worked for me in this case. I couldn't tell you why. One of these Tanrian Marshals is named Hart, and after you take care of a zombie, you bring the body to an undertaker so that they can sort of formally give it its funeral rites and put the person to rest. He ends up at Mercy's door quite often to drop off bodies, and they get off on the wrong foot when they first meet. They kind of rub each other the wrong way, and it starts off this very, like, antagonistic relationship between the two of them. Years later, Hart is feeling really lonely, and he pens a letter to a friend, and that letter finds itself at Mercy's door, and they start off this pen pal relationship, not knowing that they're writing to someone that they don't like, and it was just so cute. Again, very delightfully weird and quirky. It's difficult to describe almost. There's some really weird details, like the human soul resides in a person's appendix, and that's a really important detail in the book, and it shouldn't work, but it does, and I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. I loved the romance element, the enemies to lovers sort of thing going on. I loved the world that Megan Bannon built. It was so fun, and I want to go and read everything else she's ever written, but I've read that she's usually known for very heartbreaking endings, so I don't know if I'm emotionally prepared for that, but I loved this book. I thought it was so much fun. I believe it is the July adult Fairy Loot pick, so I'm very excited for the Fairy Loot customizations that are going to come with this finished copy. And yeah, I highly recommend this book. It was so much fun. Please check it out, especially if you like fantasy romance. It was delightful. Speaking of delightful, I picked up volumes 1 and 2 of Sailor Moon. I'm getting back into manga, and I wanted to start with a place that I knew I would love. That is Sailor Moon. I loved the anime when I was a kid. Last year, I watched the new English dub, and I wanted to finally read the manga, and I've been so very surprised at how different it is from the anime. I know there's a new, I think it's a reboot, and it's a much shorter series. I think it's called Sailor Moon Crystal. That is closer to the manga, but I haven't watched that yet. And I've just been having fun reading these manga, and this is like a new publication of them. They have larger paperback editions with like more colored pages and some special bonus material and stuff. This is sort of a cheaper version of that. These were $10 a piece, and they're slowly releasing them. So 1 and 2 are the only ones that are currently out, but I think there's gonna be like 1 a month through the rest of the year, and I believe there's like 10 volumes total. So I'm gonna be collecting them as they come out because this has been so fun. I love this story. It's just such a comfort read for me, and yeah, these were delightful, and I gave them each 4 stars. Next up, I read Beasts of Prey by Ayana Gray. This is the first book in her Beasts of Prey series. I believe the second book comes out soon. It's called Beasts of Ruin, and this was a really interesting world. In the afterword, Ayana Gray describes this as being kind of like a pan-African inspired fantasy series, and I loved that so much. That was my favorite part about this, was the mythological creatures taken from all these different mythologies throughout Africa. I thought that was so cool. I really liked the setting. One of our main characters, Kofi, is a beast keeper. She's an indentured servant working with her mother at this sort of exotic zoo where all these magical creatures reside in this city of, I think it's Lakosa. Something goes wrong one day and she escapes, and she runs into a young man who is training to be part of the elite guard of this city, and his name is Ekon. Their paths cross, and even though they're from very different sort of worlds, they end up working together to try to hunt down this beast that has been plaguing this town for 100 years. The beast is very dangerous and has a very high body count, and it's sort of inspired by the, not a myth, it's something that actually happened in Africa. I don't remember the date, but it was like these 2 lions were attacking this community and like killing people, and they were 2 male lions And it was just really weird lion behavior. It was something that I don't think has ever been observed in a lion since then, like where they were actively hunting people and where it was males instead of females. I don't know. So you can kind of see the inspiration that like, or the influence that had on this story. And I thought that was really interesting, actually. And they end up wandering through this jungle looking for this creature named the Shatani. And I really liked this. This was a fun adventure romp. I think like the story, like the bare bones story itself is nothing really quite new, but what was really cool and exciting to read about this was the setting and the African mythology influence that the story had. I thought that was so unique, and I had a really fun time reading about all these cool creatures in Kofi and Ekon's adventure. And I do think this reads a little younger, and there were some plot twists that I saw coming from like a mile away. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it was still a fun read. So I think I gave this a 4 out of 5. Let me check. Yeah, I gave this a 4 out of 5, and I can't wait to read the sequel. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I picked up my first Brandon Sanderson this month, and that was Warbreaker. This is kind of a standalone. He has mentioned that he's planning on writing a sequel for this eventually, but this has been out since like 2008, and there's no sequel yet, so it definitely acts as a standalone, but I can see where the story could go after this. And it is part of his larger Cosmere series. So this particular story follows 2 princesses, their sisters, Ciri and Vivenna. All their lives, Vivenna has been raised and prepared to marry the god king of a sort of rival nation or rival kingdom. Basically, like when she's about to get shipped off to marry this guy, their dad decides, I can't stand to lose Vivenna. Ciri, you must go in her place. Ciri, being the younger sister who was not given the education or the training for this position, gets carted off to this kingdom that she's never been to before and has really not a lot of knowledge of, and married to this, what is rumored to be despotic god king that rules this land. And that dad sucks, for the record. But yeah, this was a fun book. It was a fun standalone. I thought it was a good place to start with Brandon Sanderson, considering like what I like in fantasy. I liked the characters a lot. The magic system was definitely convoluted. It made sense while I was reading it. It's very based in color, kind of, and the collection of what is called breaths. Each person is born with a single breath, but you can collect other people's breaths, but they have to be given willingly. You can use this breath to imbue an inanimate object that was like, it has to be organic with life and a command. In order to get the inanimate object to use the breath, you have to like suck the color out of something. It's very convoluted and difficult to understand. Again, I understood it as I was reading it, but as you just witnessed, I have a very hard time describing it because it's a really cool idea, but I don't think it's executed in the cleanest way. But otherwise, I enjoyed this book for the most part. I particularly liked Ciri and Vivenna's stories. They were both unexpected, or their journeys were unexpected in their own ways. There's this character named Vasher who was really interesting and very intriguing as well. There's a character named Lightsong who is a god that does not believe in his own divinity, and that made for some very hilarious conversations. Some of those conversations I think could have been edited down quite a bit because they went on forever and were about nothing at times, but Lightsong, like, I enjoyed him, so I didn't quite mind for the most part. My biggest gripe with this book, and initially I rated this 5 stars because I had such a fun time with it and I couldn't stop thinking about it, but like the more that it sat with me, the more I did not like the way that Brandon Sanderson wrote, not his women, because I thought the main characters were well written, but his opinion about women's bodies was really weird. Vivenna and Ciri's kingdom is quite conservative in the way that they dress. So like some of, especially Vivenna's opinions made sense for the characters, but Lightsong has a couple conversations, quite a few. He's got this friendship with another god named Blushweaver, who anytime she shows up, it is written in length about how scandalously dressed she is, or like how skimpy her clothing is. I was just like, why is this necessary? And then at one point, Lightsong makes this observation about how she would respect herself more if she like covered herself up more or something. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, it was just a weird line. I don't know if that's something that pops up a lot in Brandon Sanderson's writing, or if it's just sort of like a byproduct of his like earlier, like, I'm hoping his more recent works aren't quite so cringy in that regard, but we'll see. That was the only thing I did not like about this book. But otherwise, I had a really fun time. I thought this was a great adventure. It definitely reads as a standalone, but I'm hoping he does eventually come out with a sequel because I would love to read it. And I gave this 4 out of 5 stars because, again, the weird descriptions knocked it down a star, but otherwise it was good. Then I read what is probably my second favorite book of the month, and that is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This actually comes out July 5th, so this was an arc. I first read Gabrielle Zevin when I was in middle school. She has this middle grade book called Elsewhere that I still think about to this day. I accidentally stole a library copy of it. Sorry, Gabrielle Zevin. It was not intentional, but I still have it to this day because I just like cannot part with it. That book, I think, gave me my first existential crisis when I was like 12, and I kind of forgot how deeply that book impacted me until I picked up Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, because it did the exact same damn thing, and I still had the nerve to be shocked about it. This story follows Sadie and Sam, who meet as children in a hospital ward. Sam had just recently been in an accident that basically destroyed one of his feet, and Sadie's sister has cancer when they meet, but they bond over video games and their love of world building, and they continue to, like, they continue their friendship, but, like, their journey has a lot of ups and downs. And you follow these characters through a couple of decades as they reconnect, fall out of favor with one another, reconnect again, create video games together, and just, this book was a journey. I think if you really like video games or even just story crafting, you'd have a fun time reading this. Reading about like the creative process of building a world is really, really fun. Sam and Sadie were such fully realized characters, and even though like I wanted to shake them at some points, I also totally understood like their reactions to certain things based off of like who they were up to that point. It was just so good. They also have this other friend named Marks who kind of like is the glue that holds them together, and the three of them and like the relationships between them and how they develop over time was just so well written. It was so beautiful. I loved the sort of exploration of romantic love versus like platonic love, and how rare it is to find someone that is on like the same level as you as like a creative partner. And it was so good. I will say definitely I would look into trigger warnings for this book, because there was a certain scene element that really caught me off guard. I was on an Amtrak when I was reading the majority of this book, and I was like barely holding it together. So just a warning, it does get quite heavy at times, but otherwise I thought this was a beautifully written book. I pre-ordered a Waterstones exclusive edition that is signed with sprayed edges for this book, and I cannot wait to receive it. I'm also going to an author event with Gabrielle Zevin and in early July, and I'm so excited. So I love this book, highly recommend. It is literary fiction, but again, I think if you like games, which I think those two groups of people aren't necessarily like a full circle on a Venn diagram, you should check this out. It was good. After that, I needed a much lighter read, and my friend Stephanie bought me the sequel to You Had Me At Ola, and that is A Lot Like Adios by Alexis Daria. Like I said, this is a sequel. This is part of like the Primas of Power series, I think is what it's called. It follows like these cousins who live in New York and their romantic journeys, and this is the second one. It follows Michelle, who is a graphic designer, and her childhood friend Gabriel. You learn like why they had a falling out as teenagers and like what brings them back together. I think it's like 15 years later. They're like in their early or mid-30s, I think, when they reconnect. So this is a second chance romance, and I like this a lot. Like, You Had Me At Ola was fun, and I liked like the fame element of that one, where that follows like a couple TV stars. These guys are just two regular people. Gabriel owns a gym and they're looking to expand, and his business partner ends up unknowingly hiring sort of the one that got away for Gabriel, which is Michelle, as the like marketing consultant on how to handle this expansion. This obviously helps rekindle their passion for one another, and it was fun. I liked the dynamic with the second chance, like friends to lovers thing. They did have some like issues that I thought were really blown up for the sake of like it's a romance novel. But oh well. And I had a lot of fun with this one. I think like if you've read You Had Me At Ola and haven't checked out this book, I would definitely recommend it because I liked it better. I think I gave You Had Me At Ola 3 stars and I gave this one 4 stars. So this was a fun kind of summery romance, and I can't wait to read the third one whenever it comes out. Then I read my first library book of the month because I got a library card in June, and that was Yerba Buena by Nina LaCour. This was heavier than I expected because I've seen a lot of people like describe this as like their new comfort read or like a soft romantic book. This starts off with a lot of trauma for our main 2 characters. We get like a really full background on the both of them before they even meet one another. And there's some heavy stuff going on. So I would check trigger warnings for this because it's kind of heavy. But in the story, we follow 2 women who, like I said, go through a lot in their younger lives, but their paths end up crossing at a restaurant named Yerba Buena, and they sort of immediately have a connection, but it's sort of like a right person, wrong time kind of set up. They reconnect later, and you really get to know them as 2 fully independent people and like why they work so well and like for each other. Like I said, this wasn't really what I expected it to be, but I liked the journey anyways. This is an LGBTQ relationship, and I think it handles some really heavy real world things quite well. But beyond that, I don't know. I feel like I don't have a whole lot to say about this. It's very slice of life. Not a whole lot like plot-wise went on. It was really more of a character study. But I did enjoy that. So if you like those kind of books, I would recommend this. I thought it was really well written, and the character work was really good. So I gave this 4 stars. Next up, I picked up a Fairy Loot edition I've been hanging on to for a while because I thought it would be a good like summary read. And that is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O. This is described as Spirited Away meets like Korean mythology, and I think that is a very on-point description for this book. The story follows Mina, a 16-year-old girl who sacrifices herself to the sea gods so that her brother's girlfriend, basically, Shimchong, doesn't have to, because Shimchong was chosen as the bride, and she ends up in this spiritual world that, again, is very akin to Spirited Away, and gets wrapped up in the drama surrounding the sea god. The sea god really plagues her homeland with storms every year, and it, like, kills a lot of people and just utterly destroys the land. So they're trying to figure out why the sea god is doing this and if she as his like new bride can appease him. This was a fantastic premise. The potential of this story was so good. I loved the Spirited Away vibes at the beginning. The mystery was really intriguing, but I feel like ultimately like what failed this book for me was the fact that it was a standalone YA. It read quite young and it read so fast. Like it went too fast. There's relationship developments that happen so quickly. I just don't feel the weight of it, or like I don't necessarily buy that these characters care about each other as much as they say they do. She's in the spirit world. She has like a time limit of a month to basically figure out a way to go back to her land without like dying. And it feels like maybe a couple of days, like just the way that it's written. It feels a little repetitive in that like her and the group of people she's with in the spirit world are like following up on this lead. It's not what they think they are, or they think it's gonna be. They get tricked, they get attacked. Like anytime Mina's by herself, she gets attacked. And like I never quite understood the motivation behind the attacks. So that was kind of frustrating as well. Yeah, I don't know. I gave this 3 stars because I did think it was cute and it was a fun read, and I read it super fast. I also really love this edition. I just like looking at it. But ultimately, like, just was not the story I wanted it to be. I wanted more. I needed these characters to be more fully fleshed out, and I feel like I just didn't care about them enough by the end. Or like I didn't care about them as like much as I should have. So I have seen this book compared a lot to Daughter of the Moon Goddess, and I don't know if that's just because they're both like Asian inspired fantasies, or if like the publication dates were just so close to one another. And I don't know, like, story wise, if there is a lot to like necessarily compare like between the two. I don't think that's quite fair. I think they're trying to do different things. But in that regard, I did like Daughter of the Moon Goddess more. That was just more of like the type of story I prefer, where you get like really in-depth like character fleshing out, and this just didn't have that. Again, I don't think it's necessarily like super fair to compare the two, but yeah, it didn't live up to its potential for me. But it wasn't a bad book either. I think this is a good place to start if you are younger or just getting into more like Asian inspired fantasy for the first time. I think this is a comfortable place to start because it is like very reader friendly, but it was okay. It was a fun read, but it didn't blow my mind. I read another manga this month, and that was the first volume of Spy Family, which is very popular at the moment. I'm sure you've heard about it if you know anything about manga. This follows a spy named Twilight. He is like the best agent out there. No one knows what his real face looks like. He's the master of disguise, and he is given this assignment. It's very like Mission Impossible, but funny. He's given this assignment to sort of infiltrate a enemy government and like get close to this one guy who's like notoriously difficult to get close to. And in order to do that, he must enroll his child at the school that this other guy's kid goes to. Twilight doesn't have a kid, though. He's a secret agent. He doesn't have any family or family ties. So he goes to an orphanage and kind of just picks one at random. And he ends up picking up this girl named Anya, who, unbeknownst to him, is a telepath. So he tries to keep the fact that he is a spy a secret, but she immediately knows because she can read his mind, and she just thinks he's the coolest guy ever. So she tries to help him out. Twilight also ends up having to sort of get a wife to help with this ruse, and ends up meeting, again, unbeknownst to him, an assassin, and she agrees to be his wife. And Anya is just having the best time with all of this. She thinks it's so cool. So the adults don't know what the other adult does for a living, but Anya knows everything, and it's just so fun. This was a delightful read. I think this, at least the first volume so far, has totally lived up to the hype. I can see why it's so popular. I already want to go and watch the anime, but I want to try to get through the manga first. If you've been curious about picking this up, but have been like hesitant because it is so hyped up, don't worry about it. It's a delightful time. Definitely read it if you can find it. You're kind of sold out in a lot of places, but highly recommend, and I gave it 5 stars. And finally this month, I got another library book, and that is The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. This is another book that I feel like was very hyped up, especially last fall. I think it came out like late last summer or last year. And this book, I would get so annoyed when people talked about this book because they were so cryptically vague about what this book is about. It was hard to know if it was something that I was gonna like, which is why I ended up getting it at the library ultimately, is like I just didn't know if I was gonna like it. I don't read a lot of horror, but I was so intrigued by the mystery surrounding this book. I was like, I have to know. I have to know what the heck this book is about. And I can see now, having read it, why people have a hard time talking about it, because almost anything you say is a spoiler, but I'm gonna do my best. So The Last House on Needless Street follows a man named Ted who has a cat named Olivia, and you get both their perspectives. Olivia's in particular is delightful. And there was this kind of horrible thing that happened in the community. I believe it was 10 years prior, where a little girl went missing at a lake. We follow another character who was that little girl's older sister, and she believes that Ted had something to do with it. And that's really all I can say about this book. So if you're at all intrigued by that, I would say go ahead and pick it up. It was so interesting, and it was like, it messed with my head a lot. I really felt like this was truly a puzzle I was turning over in my head just all day. Like, even when I wasn't reading about it, I was thinking about it and like trying to connect the dots. I knew there was something I wasn't catching on to. And typically when I read like horror or thrillers, I'm really trying to look out for those puzzle pieces. Like, everything feels relevant in a book like that, and I'm trying to figure out the mystery before it's revealed. I was trying my damnedest with this book, and like, I didn't see anything coming, honestly. Like, I was turning this over in my head, and it was a really great reading experience for that alone. I wasn't really quite sure where this was going at times, but like the slow trickle of information was like just enough to keep you pushing through some of like the weirder, vaguer parts that you were like, wait, what? And again, that's like all I can say about this book, but it was really good. It's definitely left an impact on me, and I will be thinking about this book for a long time. I wouldn't necessarily, I can't say that. Never mind. Read this book if, again, you're at all intrigued by this. Maybe grab it from the library if you don't want to commit to buying it. But I thought this was a really cool read, and I can't wait to read more by Catriona Ward, because this was a really, really unique read, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. All right, and that wraps up my June reading. Again, I'm really satisfied with how much I was able to read when I didn't think I was going to be able to get to much at all this month. It was a little all over the place, I think, genre-wise, but that's fun. You know, I like breaking up into different genres and checking out what all the new books and all these different genres are. I had a lot of fun. Please let me know down below if you've read any of these books and what you thought about them. If you have, I would love to hear your thoughts and discuss. No spoilers, especially for House on Needless Street. Feel free to like DM me on Instagram if you want to talk about it or whatever, but like don't leave anything in the comments, please. Please feel free to follow my socials down in the description box below, like this video, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And as always, have a lovely day. Bye.